All right. Hi, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and get started and do some introductions as folks are trickling in. Thank you all for joining us today, and welcome to today's installment of Loan Repayment 101 on income-driven repayment plans and public service loan forgiveness. My name is Lindsay Burcham, and I manage the Financial Wellness Penn program. And today I'm going to serve as a moderator through the workshop. So I want to let you know ahead of time, you can submit questions through the chat directly to me. And we'll pause periodically during today's presentation to answer the questions you've submitted. And then I will direct them to Paul when appropriate. Now, before I introduce our guest, I want to share a few disclaimers. First, today's session will be recorded so that folks who couldn't make it today can watch this later. If you don't want to be featured in the video, I suggest you leave your camera and mic muted, and we'll share the video with all attendees after the presentation. Additionally, I want to clarify that while today's session is intended for graduate students, if there are any undergrads in the audience, we welcome you to attend, and we hope that today's workshop answers some of your questions about student loans. I'm pleased to introduce today's guest. So today's workshop will be led by Paul Gerard, founder and president of PG Presents LLC, an independent student loan consulting company. Mr. Gerard is a well-renowned and respected student loan expert, especially in the graduate and health professions communities. We're very excited to have him with us today and share his student loan expertise with all of you. So thanks for joining us, Paul, and I'll hand it over to you now.
Thanks very much. Thanks, Lindsay. Hi, everybody. We are really glad you're joining us today. Lindsay gave me a little bit of an idea about the different disciplines you guys are coming from, and we've got a whole bunch of folks: nursing, veterinary medicine, design, engineering, medicine, education, dentistry, arts and sciences. I think we've got law school and social policy and practice. So we've kind of got all the major food groups. So we really appreciate you guys joining us. And if we do have any undergraduates, we're delighted you're with us because you may be facing some of these challenges if you go on to graduate school. Real quickly, just about me, and this is not to try to impress you. Lindsay said some nice things about my working with Penn and how long I've been doing this. I have been in higher education, guys, for almost 40 years, and that in and of itself doesn't make me an expert, but I have seen a lot of stuff that's happened along the way in terms of repayment. And the company that I run is an independent company that is designed solely to help you guys figure out the best way to repay your student loans. We're focusing today on what are called IDRs, or income-driven repayment plans, and the public.
Hey, Paul, you got muted.
Okay, there we go. All right, so first thing out of the gate, I hope you heard that little introduction here. First thing out of the gate is there are some other resources for you guys to help you once this is done. We've recorded some repayment modules. Some of you may actually have seen them. They're short and topical. We tried to keep them to maybe the 5-8 minute range. They're on the Financial Wellness Penn website. And this is where you can go in, and if you have a question specifically about federal consolidation or refinancing or pay versus repay or married borrowers, you can go in and watch just that module specifically on that topic. So there's some repayment modules to help you. The Student Financial Services Offices is pleased to help you as well. We've got a bunch of free stuff on our site, and then you'll also be working with your loan servicer along the way. Okay, so as we get started, I want you to look at these 3 questions here, and please nobody take offense at any of this. But as you're trying to figure out the best repayment strategy, whether you're going to be an upcoming a nursing school graduate or veterinarian, etc., there are 3 questions you need to ask yourself in determining the best repayment strategy for your loans. First of all, guys, you got to know what you borrowed, what kind of loans are in your portfolio. You need to know who your loan servicer is. Now, we're not going to spend a lot of time on this. I'm kind of assuming or hoping you guys know this. The loan portfolio, if you look at the footer, you can find a listing of all your federal loans from college, post-bac programs, and all the loans you're taking out at Penn. All your federal loans can be found at a database at studentaid.gov. When you log in, you'll see a dashboard that lists all of your federal loans. And guys, it will also list who your loan servicer is. Keep this simple. You are borrowing your loans from the Department of Education, from the federal government, but they assign the servicing to third parties. You guys should know these names: Fed Loan Servicing, Navient, Nelnet, Great Lakes, etc. So be sure you know what you've borrowed, who you're working with in repayment, and when the loans come due. Most of them come due about 6 months after you graduate. You've got to next determine, do you want to be aggressive? Do you want to hang your hat on the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program, which we're going to talk about? And then once you know what your portfolio looks like and who you're working with and when the loans are coming due, and you kind of sort of know how you want to go about it, that's when you choose a repayment plan. And we're going to focus on that today. Okay, you're going to hear me say this time and time again. When your loans come due and you're choosing a plan, I have never met anyone who wanted a repayment plan where the required payment was just astronomical and left them no wiggle room at all. We would encourage you, look at the different plans and find one, guys, where the required minimum payment is manageable and comfortable in your budget. Now, granted, Lindsay, as you know, comfortable means different things to different people, but find something you're comfortable with and then decide if you want to be aggressive, then you can overpay with no penalty at any point, and you can actually put the extra payment on the most expensive loan, the loan with the highest rate. But as you're going to find out and may already know with the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program, if you are using an income plan, you do not want to be overpaying on your loans, because that wouldn't make a lot of sense if the government's going to pick up the tab for you tax-free in 10 years with Public Service Loan Forgiveness. So right out of the gate, when you're choosing a plan, just find one with a payment you can comfortably afford. We're going to encourage you to look at plans based on time first. We're going to talk about those in a moment. And I want you to pay special attention, guys, to this bullet at the bottom. And Lindsay, as you know, it's really hard to be patient when folks are repaying their loans. But guys, your debt, your principal that you borrowed will never come down until you pay more than the interest that's due each month on your loans. Now, if I was doing this workshop in person, I'd have all of you pull your phones out or your iPads or laptops or whatever you're using, and we'd go through this exercise together, and I could actually watch your reaction as you do it. I want all of you, though, if you will, if you've never done this, just on the computer you've got now or on a phone or something, I want you to go to Google. Just do a Google search. And I want everybody to just simply type in interest only calculator. It'll start to pre-fill for you. So type in interest only calculator, and you're going to see a bunch of different sites. I want you to choose the one that says calculate stuff, calculatestuff.com, real simple. Now, once you get to that site, you're going to see 4 different fields. Now, this may be a little difficult if you're not sure what your debt's going to be, but I think they have it pre-filled, Lindsay, with $250,000, because I think this is normally used for mortgages. I want all of you to put in a nice round number of something you think may be your debt when you graduate from Penn, regardless of your degree program. Now, if you don't have an idea about what the average rate is on your student loans, I'm going to encourage you, go ahead and just put 6%. That's just an average. Then I want you to change the term to 10 years. And the interest only period doesn't really matter, but go ahead and change it to 3 years. And I want you to hit calculate. And the number you're looking at, that represents the monthly interest you will have to pay before your debt ever comes down. Now, the reason we're doing this is to set the table for the discussion on income plans and public service loan forgiveness. So if you've never done this exercise before, we would always encourage you to know at least an estimate about how much interest is going to be due each month on your student loans. Okay, with that as a background, let's jump right into this. When your loans come due, your federal loans, which again, usually it's going to be about 6 months after you graduate. For most of you, you got a graduation date in May, it'll be around December of your graduation year. Guys, there are a whole bunch of individual repayment plans, but as Lindsay knows and the folks at Student Financial Services know, they all fall, guys, into one of 2 categories. The repayment plans are either based on a time period, we call that time, or they're based on income, called income driven. Now, in order to understand income driven plans, you got to understand time plans. So look at these. These are simple if you can afford them, because all the servicer does when you enter repayment, Guys, they literally take your balance, principal and interest, and they just spread it out in even payments over either a 10-year period of time, 120 payments, or a 25-year period of time if you've got more than $30,000 in loans, which respectfully, most of you are going to have at least that, and much more from graduate school, up to 25 years if you do an extended plan. It's the same payment every month. And the thing that's interesting about these plans is the payment calculation, guys, doesn't have a thing to do with your income, your marital status, how you file your taxes, your family size. That's one reason folks who can afford these plans really like them, because they're great for budgeting. They know that the payment's going to be the same all the time. Get married, good luck. You know, it doesn't matter. How you file your taxes, jointly, separately. It's completely irrelevant with a time plan. There are a couple more things very important about this plan. These plans always cover more than the interest due. Now, the 10-year plan's obviously going to cover a lot more than the interest due, but the 25-year plan will as well. So, Lindsay, as you know, if they use a time-driven plan, the balance starts to come down immediately. And that's not always the case with income plans. And I want you to look at that third bullet. This is extremely important to understand before we talk about the income plans. If you do a 10-year term, if you could afford that, a standard 10-year plan, and you made minimum payments only, you never overpaid, at the end of 10 years, the debt is gone. There is nothing to forgive. Same thing with a 25-year plan. If you do a 25-year extended plan, if you looked at the 10-year plan and you go, well, there's no way I can afford that, let me go look at what the payments would be over 25 years. And I'm going to show you examples here in a few minutes. If you did a 25-year plan, guys, and you never overpaid, you were crazy enough to hang on to it for 25 years, and you never accelerated the payments, your debt would be gone in 25 years and nothing to forgive. The takeaway here is, if you're using a time-driven plan, then you can, forgiveness goes out the window. These plans don't have anything to do with forgiveness programs. By the way, if you have any private loans, time-driven plans are most common with private loans as well. So those are time plans, but we're here to discuss income-driven repayment plans. And guys, keep it simple. If you can't afford payments on a 10-year plan, and maybe you can't even afford payments with a 25-year plan, you're going to be looking at using what's called an income-driven repayment plan, because these are designed for borrowers who have a significant gap between how much you owe and what your income is. And so bullet number 2 should make common sense. The bigger the gap between your federal debt and your income, the more likely you're going to need an income-driven repayment plan. Now, let's, I hope I get some of these numbers right, but let's use nursing as an example. If you come out of Penn and your federal debt is $80,000, I'm not downplaying that amount of debt, but if you come out with $80,000 in debt and you land a job making $75,000, I would argue that unless you've got some other kind of expenses, private loans or consumer debt or something, you're not going to need an income plan. The gap is not really big. But if you come out of Penn and nursing school and you owe $150,000 in federal debt and you're making $75,000 a year, unless you're living at home, you have a partner or a spouse who loves you and says they're going to pay for all this and help you with your student loan debt or pay your living expenses, you're going to need an income plan. Now, look at that third bullet. There are many different income plans, known as pay-as-you-earn, and repay, known as revised pay-as-you-earn. These are the most popular plans. Lindsay knows I'm a stickler for semantics here. Look at that asterisk. Many of you have heard of something called IBR, income-based repayment. Guys, that is a much, much older plan. Graduates who are coming out today using income plans are almost always using pay and repay, and we're going to focus on those. IBR is much, much older. Look at this fourth bullet. Payments are not based on a time period. The monthly payments are based on income, no kidding, hence the name. And they're also based on family size, and the payments change annually. and I say this a little tongue in cheek, I hope this doesn't offend anybody. The formula looks at income and family size, but of those two components, guys, family size has the least to do with it. So I would simply say to you, if you're interested in having children, good for you, knock yourself out. Adoption, if you want to, which I think would be great, but don't go out and have children to lower your student loan payment. It doesn't work that way. The formula is heavily driven based on income. Now, here's how the payments are calculated. Look at this carefully. And we're going to be watching for questions that we're going to pick up on when we stop here and field questions here in just a few minutes. The payment calculation with any income plan, certainly including pay and repay, it's based on a federal formula that looks at income from a prior year tax return. Now jump down to that third bullet. Clearly, an income increase is going to show on the next year's tax return. And so one way to think about this is calculation with income plans, guys, always kind of sort of lags a year behind. Look at that first bullet in the indentation or whatever. Some borrowers, and maybe you've heard this, if we've got, I think, at least one medical school student with us, maybe some dentistry as well, and maybe some from law school who've heard this as well. Some borrowers right out of school, when they first enter repayment, actually get a zero calculated payment for the first year, the first 12 months. Remember, the payments change every year. You have to renew every year and give your servicer new income information. Some borrowers, though, guys, actually get a zero payment the first year. And the reason they get that is because they file a tax return for zero, or they have really minimal income from maybe a small amount of work they did their senior year, but they file a zero, tax return. And that's what the loan servicer looks at when calculating the first 12 months of payments. The only time current income is used is if your current income is significantly less than what you showed on a tax return for a prior year. Let's play that out. The current pandemic might be a perfect example of this, although, as I think you know, they've actually waived the payments for borrowers all the way until January 2021. But look at that second bullet for a moment. Here's why they're doing this. Let's say you were making $100,000 last year and you go in to renew your income plan, and you've lost your job or had to cut back hours, and now you're making $60,000 a year. Well, when you go in to renew, your loan servicer is going to see last year's tax return with $100,000 on it. But if you're only making 60, there's a way that you can tell them, hey, don't use last year's tax return. My current income has dropped dramatically. So the takeaway from this slide is, guys, they're looking at last year's income when they do the calculation, unless you happen to be in dire straits and your current income has dropped. I see we've got some questions already coming in. Lindsay, I'm glancing over there. I'm going to answer the question about married borrowers here in just a moment. Nice timing with the slide, the person who has the question. We are actually going to do we'll see, what's the date here? Look down at the footer. We're going to do a workshop specifically for married borrowers and those of you thinking about getting married. We're going to do a workshop on October the 14th. Lindsay, I think they'll be getting notice about that through their schools or somehow from you guys. So mark your calendars for October 14th. So here's just a brief little preview of it. Spousal income is always counted under every income plan, doesn't matter which one you're using, pay or repay, when you're filing a joint tax return. Now, we're not tax experts. We never claim to be, but we know how the taxes work with these income plans. And if you're married filing jointly, doesn't matter what plan you're using, spousal income is going to count. Look at that indentation, though. If you happen to marry somebody who has federal student loan debt, that's factored into the calculation. Now, guys, it's not dollar for dollar. For example, if you married somebody and their income is $100,000 a year, first of all, good choice, well done. If they've got $100,000 in federal student loan debt, it's not a wash. It's not as though they have no income at all. Federal debt is factored in, but it's not a huge factor in the calculation. So spousal income is always counted under all income plans when you file jointly. Look at the second bullet. The only way to exclude spousal income is to file a separate tax return and use the repayment plan called Pay As You Earn. I'm going to show you this here in just a moment. Because the newest income plan, Repay, which actually isn't all that new anymore, it came out in 2015, it always counts spousal income. So Maria, I hope it's okay to call you by first name. That question, if you're married filing jointly, it's always, spousal income is always going to be counted. If your spouse has federal debt, that's factored in as well. But if you need to exclude spousal income, file a separate return and use Pay As You Earn. Lindsay, here's the promotion I was telling you about. Module number 7 that we've already recorded and is out on the Financial Wellness Penn website. It's already out there. It's a short preview on married borrowers and repayment. But once again, we're going to do a much more detailed workshop and tell you guys exactly how to go in and calculate this for yourself to determine the impact of spousal income and debt on your monthly payments. If you look at that last bullet on the federal student aid site, the studentaid.gov site, there's a loan simulator that will let you very, very easily figure out what are the payments going to be married filing jointly and including spousal income, or married filing separately and excluding spousal income. So that's the quick and dirty on married borrowers. Now, as Lindsay has heard me say multiple times in the training that we've done at FSS and with the financial wellness folks, remember what we said about time plans. If you do a time plan and make the minimum payment, guys, at the end of the term, your debt's gone. I mean, they work kind of just like a mortgage. You can accelerate payments if you want to. If you make minimum payments with a time plan, nothing to forgive, the debt's gone. Guys, income plans don't work that way. Please pay special attention to this. Let's use Pay As You Earn as our example. Pay As You Earn has a 20-year term. So guys, here is what is going to happen. If you get into Pay As You Earn, you got 20 years to get rid of the debt, not a day longer. But here's the deal. Your loan servicer, they don't have a clue, are you going to need all 20 years or not? How could they? You've got to renew every year and give them income information. They have no idea what your income's going to do. If you happen to be a medical school student watching this, you know that for at least 3 years after you graduate, you're going to have relatively low income compared to your debt while you're receiving your stipend as a medical resident. If you're a dental school graduate or dental school student attending this, and I think we've got a few, many of you will go right into practice, but if you do a 1-year GPR, a general practice residency, or maybe 2-year pediatrics residency, same thing. You're going to have a stipend with a relatively low income compared to your overall debt. So here's what's going to happen. You do Pay As You Earn, you got 20 years to get rid of the debt. One of 3 things will happen. The first thing that could happen is that after you make 10 years worth of payments, if you're working in the nonprofit sector, your debt will be forgiven through the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program that we're going to dive into here in just a few minutes. That's after 120 payments. And guys, if your debt's forgiven with public service after 10 years of payments, the 20-year term with Pay is irrelevant. You'll never hit 20 years. You're done in 10. That's the first thing that could happen. Well, what if you don't do PSLF? Maybe you thought you might land in the public sector and you don't, or maybe you just never intended to use public service loan forgiveness anyway. You just ran the numbers and you needed Pay As You Earn as your income plan. Well, the second thing that will happen is you just pay the debt off yourself before the 20 years is up. Now, again, common sense here. Common sense says that if the gap between how much you borrowed and what your debt is not real big, you'll pay it off well before the 20 years is up. But if your debt, if the gap is huge, look at number 3. If you're in Pay As You Earn with a 20-year term and you don't retire it with public service and the debt is so high that you can't get rid of it by year 20, the government will get rid of it for you. You hit the end of the term and it's called term forgiveness. The government just says, you can't pay us anymore. You're not allowed to. But the forgiveness amount is considered taxable income. So that's how an income plan works. With Pay As You Earn, it's 20 years. With revised Pay As You Earn, it's 25 years. Okay, real quickly, I'll look at pay versus repay. I'm trying to watch the clock here. I think we're doing fine time-wise. There is a separate module, module number 6, that gets into more detail on pay versus repay. But let's take a look at some of the most important factors in terms of trying to determine which of these is best for you. First of all, the calculation of payments. Under either pay or repay, guys, the payment calculation formula is exactly the same. It's 10% of something called discretionary income. And guys, all due respect, don't worry about the definition of discretionary income. I mean, you see it footed there at the bottom. Just think of it this way. 10% of X is 10% of X. So when you enter repayment, whether you use pay or repay, the calculation of the payment's going to be the same. But here's where it starts to get a little complicated. If you've got questions on this, please send them into Lindsay. We'll answer them in just a few minutes when we stop. You are never kicked out of pay as you earn. You could make $1 bajillion a year and you will never be kicked out of pay as you earn, because when you go to renew the payment amount, if 10% of your discretionary income is higher than what you would have originally paid in the standard 10-year plan, your payment under pay is capped at that original standard 10-year amount. You are not kicked out of pay as you earn. Your payment never goes higher than that original standard 10-year amount. Look at repay. Repay has no payment count. If you're making $200,000 a year, it's going to be 10% of discretionary income at $200,000 a year. If you're making $500,000 a year, it's going to be 10% of discretionary income at $500,000 a year. There's no payment cap. All right, back to that in just a moment. Look at the repayment term. The term with pay is 20 years. That simply means if you choose pay as you earn, you got 20 years to get rid of your debt. If you choose repay, you've got 25 years to get rid of your debt. And they work the same way. If there's anything left at the end of the term, we just mentioned this on the previous slide, anything you don't get repaid by 20 years with pay or 25 years with repay, it's going to be forgiven by the government, but you have to pay taxes on it. Spousal income, we just covered this. Always counted if you're filing jointly. But with pay as you earn, if you need to bag the spouse or get rid of the spouse's income, file a separate return and spousal income will not be counted. But now pay special attention to this very last bullet. It's very important. A lot of your colleagues with really high debt are going to be interested in using repay to repay their loans, and here's why. Repay has a unique provision that says anytime the interest you owe each month, and remember we ran this, or I hope you did a few slides earlier, anytime the interest you owe each month just to keep your debt level is higher than the calculated repay amount, the government will whack it in half with what's called a 50% subsidy. Guys, the easiest way to think about this subsidy, this is on the unsub loans, which for grad students is pretty much all you've got. The easiest way to think about this, guys, is the government slows down how fast your debt is growing anytime you owe more in interest than your calculated payment amount. Let's just use a simple example. Let's suppose you've borrowed about $200,000. And let's suppose the interest you owe each month just to keep the debt level is $1,000 a month. Ridiculous, but that's roughly what it would be. Let's suppose the payment calculation with repay is $300 a month. And by the way, for residents, this is very, very typical. Okay, what's wrong with this picture? You owe $1,000 a month just to keep the debt level, but your payment's only $300 a month, which you can afford, but you're going in the hole $700 every month. That's how these balances get so outrageous. Guess what repay does? Repay says, no, it's not going to go in the hole $700 a month. It's going to go in the hole $350 a month. So guys, all repay is doing, it's slowing down the hurt. It's slowing down how fast your debt is growing anytime you owe more in interest than your monthly payment amount. So take a look at this. And Lindsay, I have you as my witness, and I know we're recording this. There is no way I can say on this call which repayment plan is going to be better for you. Again, I hope you will run the time plans first before you look at the income plans. But this is kind of a general statement. Pay as you earn tends to be best or may be best for borrowers who have to exclude spousal income, who look at their, whose spouse is really doing really well, and the inclusion of spousal income is causing the monthly payments to go really high. So if you've got to exclude spousal income, your hand's pretty much going to be forced into filing a separate return and using pay as you earn. Pay as you earn may also be best for a borrower, and I say this very respectfully. If you look at your debt level and you look at your income potential, and maybe you're single and nobody loves you and you're never going to get married or have a partner because your debt's so high or whatever, and you think there is no way I'm ever going to be able to retire the debt by the end of the term. I'll make all my payments on time, but my payments are so low, my debt's going to be growing. There's no way I can do this. Pay as you earn might be better for you because you'll be debt free after 20 years compared to being debt free after 25 years with repay. Well, then who's repay for? Use your common sense. Look at this. Repay is going to be best for a borrower who has a huge gap between what they owe and what their income is. Because common sense says the bigger the gap or the higher the debt, the higher that income payment's going to be. And if the gap is really big, you will really benefit from the subsidy repay offers by slowing down how fast your debt grows. Repay might also be best for somebody who's single, doesn't have to worry about spousal income because there's no spouse involved, or maybe you've got a partner and y'all aren't married, or with all due respect, you're married, but your spouse has relatively low income. So Lindsay, as you know, that's just a guide for who pay and repay might be best for. Okay, a couple more things and then we'll stop for questions and get into public service loan forgiveness. We get asked a lot, well, once I choose a plan, can I switch or am I committed to never being able to change? You can always switch repayment plans. Here's kind of what we see. We've seen borrowers start in a time plan, maybe even a 10-year plan. Maybe they're living at home, maybe they have a partner or spouse who's helping them out and something happens and all of a sudden they don't have access to help with the rent, utilities, et cetera, et cetera. So they start in a time plan and all of a sudden they can't afford it anymore. You can move to an income plan at any time. Look at the second bullet. What if you run the numbers and the 10-year plan's not working? Or there's no way you can do it. And you run the numbers and the 25-year plan's also pushing it. But then you run the numbers on the income plan and the payments are really low and you go, but I can pay more than that. If you start in an income plan and you want to be aggressive, you don't have to switch to a time plan, just overpay on the loan with the highest interest rate. And occasionally we've seen, Lindsay, as you know, we've seen borrowers who, you get the best bang for the buck if you overpay on your most expensive loan. But we've seen occasionally where a borrower will go, look, I want to just get some loans paid off. So I'm going to find the loans with the smallest balance, even though the rate may be lower, and I'm just going to get rid of those first. But if you start in an income plan, guys, and you want to be aggressive, you don't have to switch plans. Look at the third one, really important. What if you're single now and you have high debt and you go repay, I'm not sure I understand all about this, but that subsidy sounds great. So I'm going to start in repay because my debt's going to grow not as fast as it would in pay because pay doesn't have that subsidy. And then you marry into money and he or she loves you a lot, but they're just not having anything to do with your student loans. And they don't want their income being counted in the calculation of your payments. Well, you could file a separate return and switch to pay at that time. So those are some examples of switching repayment plans. So Lindsay, let's stop. We need to get into public service. What kind of questions have we got? I saw the one that Maria asked about spousal income that we've already answered. What have you got? Okay, sorry guys, but thanks for letting us know here. Okay, let's go into public service loan forgiveness. And again, we've got a separate module in this, module number 8. Okay, guys, keep this simple. A lot of misinformation about this program. It's not as complicated as people think it is. This program was passed into law in 2007, 13 years ago. And the intention was to try and get borrowers any degree program. For those of you in medicine or dentistry, or in some cases nursing, veterinary medicine, specialty has nothing to do with this. It was designed to give everybody a crack at getting their debt forgiven if they'd work in the public nonprofit sector for 10 years. And the promise by the government was they didn't care what you owed after 10 years. Even if your debt had grown dramatically, they'll forgive it absolutely free of taxes, which is a huge benefit. So that's what the public service loan forgiveness program was designed to do, incentivize you guys to get into public service. Now, one really cool thing about this program, before we get into the comments, is that you don't sign a contract that I promise I'll work in the public sector. No, you just start making payments on your loans with an income plan and you track them, something you probably do anyway. And I don't know if you've heard that over the past 2 years, 99% of the people who applied were denied. We're going to take a look at why that's the case here in a moment. But the qualifications are really quite simple for qualifying for public service loan forgiveness. I want you to look at this. And as we go through this, just think about your own student loan portfolio. Remember, I said right out of the gate, you got to know what you borrowed. Be sure you know what kind of loans you have in your portfolio, and look at this. Guys, 3 things have to happen, and they have to be happening at the same time in order for you to qualify for public service loan forgiveness. Just a checklist. You got to make 10 years worth of payments. You can't shorten the time period. It's 120 payments. The payments have to be with an eligible plan. Well, what does that mean? It just has to be an income plan. Common sense says if you did a standard 10-year plan, there's nothing to forgive in 10 years. If you do a 25-year plan, there's plenty to forgive after 10 years, but that's a time plan. It doesn't count. You got to make 10 years worth of payments with an income plan. By the way, look at the asterisk. The payments don't have to be consecutive. What if you paid for 3 years? Something happens and you need to postpone your payments with a forbearance for 6 months. Well, guys, the clock just gets stuck at 3 years. And when you come out of forbearance and start making your payments again with an income plan, it picks right back up where you left it. The clock doesn't reset. So it's 10 years worth of payments with an income plan. Look at number 2. As Lindsay knows, I find this a little amusing actually. On direct loans, on eligible loans, well, look at your portfolio. The federal government, guys, took over all the federal lending in the 2010-11 academic year. How could you not have direct loans if you've been borrowing since then? The government can't forgive loans they didn't make. So it's 10 years worth of payments with an income plan on direct loans while you're working full-time for an eligible employer. And guys, an eligible employer is a nonprofit like a 501c3.gov.edu.org. And by the way, the feds define full-time as 30 hours a week or the number of hours that the organization you're working for defines as full-time, whichever is greater. So for example, if you're working as a county clerk and they define full-time as 38 hours a week, well, you got to work 38 hours a week. Now, a couple of things about this. I just said the payments don't have to be consecutive. They don't. The employment doesn't have to be consecutive. Let me pick on our friends from medical school. Let's say you do the minimum 3-year residency. Maybe you're going to go into family medicine. You go into family medicine, you do a 3-year residency program, and you're working for a nonprofit teaching hospital in your residency. Those 3 years are likely going to count. What if you thought you were going to do public service, but when you finish your training, you happen to land a job in the private sector? The money's better, you think you're going to really like it, and so you had thought you were going to do public service. But when you came out of training, you had 3 years in, you went, no, I'm going to go private sector. Well, what if after 1 year of private sector work, you were still making your payments, you still had direct loans, but you were missing the right kind of work? What if after 1 year you went, well, the money's great, but I hate these people, I want to go back and work in the nonprofit sector? The clock picks right back up where you left it. So Lindsay, as you know, the clock doesn't move unless all 3 of these things are happening at the same time. Personal opinion, but I will say I've been doing this a while. I think the majority of borrowers who qualify for public service, I think it's probably going to be 11 or 12 years before you guys qualify, not because you're late making payments, but a lot can happen over 10 years to make you need to pause your payments. Maybe getting married, you have a medical emergency, maybe you switch jobs, but that's how you qualify for the public service loan forgiveness program. And I think, Lindsay, it's module, let's see, that's number 8. I think it's module number 9 where we have, or it may be in module number 8, where we have some information about how you actually enroll in the program. Now, I wanted to show you this slide because over the past 2 years, 99% of the people who applied were denied for public service. And a lot of people went crazy going, told you so, it's never going to happen. This is fraught with peril, et cetera. Why would I consider doing this? I want you to look at the reasons why for the denials. Over half the borrowers who applied for forgiveness of public service, guys, they were using a 25-year time plan. And I say this with great respect. I have no idea what kind of counseling they got, if any at all, but they were in the wrong plan. The government can't just go, oh, that's okay, we'll forget that and let you qualify. 15% of them had the wrong kind of loans. They were trying to get forgiveness on loans that the government didn't even make. A lot of folks left some information apparently off the application. So you know exactly, there it is. You guys know exactly how to qualify. And I would argue that you are way too smart to actually turn in an application for public service loan forgiveness unless you know for a fact you've made all your payments. And that's why you enroll and track your payments every single year. Now, a quick summary. When you hear about forgiveness and you hear your colleagues or your friends talking about taxation, term forgiveness, you're using pay 20 years and you don't retire the debt. You're using repay 25 years and you don't retire the debt by the end of the term. Term forgiveness is considered taxable income. I'm going to show you the example here in just a moment. But guys, the forgiveness amount under public service loan forgiveness is not considered taxable income. Okay, now, let me go back here and, all right. Let's see here. I want to show you some repayment numbers. Lindsay, can you guys still hear me okay?
Yep, sounds good, Paul.
Oh, great, okay. Let me show you some repayment numbers. And guys, we've got so many different disciplines on here. I kind of struggled a little bit with what debt to use and what program to use. I'd encourage you to use the calculators we're going to reference at the end of this workshop. I'd encourage you to use those to run your own numbers so you know exactly what your repayment is going to look like and what the forgiveness might look like. But I want to be sure you know what I'm using in the numbers I'm about to show you. I'm using someone who had a 4-year program. This might be veterinary medicine. They borrowed the full direct unsub every year, $40,500. The rates were based on class of 2020. The rates changed every year on new loans. The loans in a repayment 6 months out. No changes to marital status. This person is single. There's no change whatsoever to their family size. And I've got a $85,000 starting salary. I think for many veterinarians, that might be about the average at the clinics. I think many of you get bonuses for, depending on how many animals you help out. But those are the assumptions that I'm using in these numbers. Now I want you to look at this. Excuse me. I ran at 85,000. I threw in about a 30% tax bracket. And I have no idea if that's what you'd actually face or not. But the take-home pay for somebody making 85,000, Lindsay, it'd be in the neighborhood of about $5,000 a year. Now, I want you to look first at what the 10-year plan would look like, monthly basis, and what the 25-year plan would look like on a monthly basis. The standard, that's $2,000 a month. That's 40% of your take-home pay. I'd argue that one's going to be pretty tough. So if it is, next plan you look at, well, what if you did a 25-year plan? And guys, don't completely freak out at the total amount paid. That's if you paid for 25 years and never accelerated payments. You're just looking for a lower payment. Well, the extended plan drops it pretty dramatically, but that's still almost $1,200 a month. Now I want you to look at repay. I'm using repay because it's the most recent plan. Remember the assumptions, starting at $85,000 a year. I want you to notice that with repay, the monthly payment changes over the 25 years. Well, of course it does. It's an income plan. The payments start relatively low, $549, and they go up each year. And by year 25, they're about $1,200, almost $1,300. So a much more affordable payment. What I want you to look at is line number 3. I want you to look at what this borrower who borrowed $162,000, who's making $85 a year. I want you to look at the PSLF paid amount. What does that represent? Guys, that's what this borrower would have paid over 10 years if they were working in the nonprofit sector, about $77,000. Now stop for a moment. They borrowed $162. They've only paid back $77,000 after 10 years. Look how much is still left, $197,000. If they're working in the nonprofit sector, that is forgiven absolutely tax-free. You are looking right there at why PSLF is of such great interest to so many borrowers. It's the greatest return on investment in history. But I want you to look at term forgiveness. I know I'm showing you a lot of numbers, but just think it through. If this borrower didn't use standard, didn't use extended, used repay, 25-year term to get rid of the debt, but they didn't use public service loan forgiveness, they landed in the private sector, they made minimum payments, they never get the debt retired. They still owe $180,000 at year 25. And if you're thinking, how in the world could that happen? Here's how it could happen. I ran an estimate, and Lindsay, the interest-only payment on $162,000 is over $800 a month. Well, look at the first payment in repay. It's under that. This kid's debt is growing even with repay right out of the gate. That's term forgiveness. They have to pay taxes on that. So that's an example of how the repayment plans work and why public service loan forgiveness is of such importance to so many people. Now, before we finish this up with questions, kind of your to-do list, I always like to give everybody an action item list here. We encourage you to track your loans every year. Those are the questions I started with. Know what you borrowed, know who your servicer is when your loans are coming due. Run your own repayment numbers using the available calculators, and look at the asterisk down there. With all due respect to all the disciplines that are on here, we do know that if you're from Perelman, you're veterinary medicine or dentistry, there are repayment calculators designed specifically for your disciplines. The graduate professional team at FSS can help you with details and get access to those calculators if you don't already know about them. Guys, I'd encourage you to be very cautious where you get your information about repayment. Please lean on the folks at Penn. Use all the available resources you can while you're at Penn. They're going to be delighted to help you. So Lindsay, before we show the upcoming presentations and the review and all, let's stop and see if we got some more questions.
Yeah, we have a few great questions. So someone asks, with public service loan forgiveness, if you switch from part-time to full-time employment working in the public sector, how does that work, or does it only count the full-time years?
Great, it only counts for full-time. That's great. In fact, let me just, there we go. There we go, right there. Those three things, great question. Those three things, if those are not happening, the clock, I call it a PSLF clock. The clock's got to tick 120 times. If any of those is missing, the clock's not ticking. So in the question you just sent me, okay, if somebody's working half-time, all right, they may still be making their payments with an income plan, I hope. They're making them on direct loans, but they're missing door number 3. So, you know, Lindsay, if somebody worked full-time for 3 years, the clock's running. And if they went to part-time, the clock pauses. And if they started back working full-time, the clock picks right back up where you left it. Great question.
Awesome. So the next question is, how do you track your payments? Do you do it via your monthly statement or in an Excel doc or something?
Great question. And let's give you the quick answer. There's a document called the Employment Certification Form. If you go, if you watch the module on public service on the Financial Wellness at Penn site, you'll see a link to this. It's studentaid.gov/public service. It's called the Employment Certification Form. It's a document you fill out every year, and your employer fills it out. You send it to Fed Loan Servicing, who's the designated servicer for the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program. And every year they send you an annual statement and they say, this is how many payments you've made. This is how many payments you've got to go. I can, I hate Lindsay to speak on behalf of Penn, but I guarantee you before you get out of Penn, somebody will sit down with you or go through with you exactly how to enroll in and track your payments for public service. Great question.
Great. So our next question is, how does PSLF work if you have undergrad loans, worked in the nonprofit sector for a few years, and then went back to grad school and picked up more direct loans?
Can we just go to the next question, please? This is always an interesting one. Okay, great question. Okay, first of all, I'm going to make an assumption that with everything's relative, I know. But my assumption is going to be that the amount of debt somebody has in undergrad is relatively small compared to what they had in grad school. Okay, go back to the requirements for PSLF right there. If you had loans from college, direct loans, and you took, let's say you took I call them gap years. You took 2 gap years and your loans entered repayment. I don't know if you remember this or not, but you had a 6-month grace period. Those loans entered repayment and you paid on them for a year and a half. And then you enrolled at Penn in grad school. Those loans went right back into an in-school deferment. If you were working for a nonprofit during the gap years, then based on this little example, you'd have 18 months of eligibility already in the hopper on public service loan forgiveness, but only on the loans from college. I hope that makes sense because you were making payments, if you were using an income plan, on direct loans for those 18 months in the gap years. That has nothing to do with the loans you borrowed while at Penn. When you graduate from Penn and start paying on those, that's when the clock is going to start on public service loan forgiveness for the loans from graduate school. Great question.
Great. Thanks for that explanation, Paul. So the next question is more about the logistics of term forgiveness. So Natalia asks, seeing the large amount owed as taxes after the 25 years with term forgiveness, is that owed in full when you file taxes, or how does one go about paying such a large amount?
That's a great question. And Lindsay, do me a favor. I want to be sure we address the borrower who sent you the question last night. I've got it written here. Will you remind me to answer that about the 2007 date? Sorry.
Yep, no problem.
Okay. So here's the deal that's very frustrating. Great question about term forgiveness. Guys, do the math. If you look at the chart on our homepage, on our website about the different plans, pay as you earn didn't start until 2012. And it's the first time you could use it. Okay, it's got a 20-year term. The first time anybody is going to hit term forgiveness is 2032. That's 12 years from now. Revised pay as you earn repay. It didn't start until 2015. That's the first year anybody could use it. Okay, it's got a 25-year term on it. The first time anybody's going to hit term forgiveness, not PSLF, term forgiveness on repay is 2040. So the simple answer to the person's question is that has to be claimed as taxable income that year. Now, I don't know this from personal experience, fortunately. The IRS does allow installment kind of plans for people who can't afford all their taxes at one time. But guys, we don't have a precedent to go on. The summary I just showed you of estimated taxes, I've got a little, the third bullet down there. I just estimated the rate at 30%. I have no clue what kind of taxation rate will be in effect when that has to be claimed as taxable income. But it has to be claimed as taxable income, all of it, that year. That's one of the frustrating things, Lindsay, as you know. We don't have anything to go on other than how it works.
That's great. Thank you. So I do want to be mindful of folks' time. We have passed 1 o'clock. Yeah. I can continue asking the questions that are in the queue if that's all right with you.
Yeah, and let me real quickly, because I know I forgot one. We had a question that came in last night, something to the effect of loans borrowed before 2007. Did those qualify for public service loan forgiveness? I'm going back here to a slide. Whoever asked that question, I hope you're looking at this. Look at the asterisk by pay as you earn. Any direct loan, it doesn't matter when you borrowed it. Any direct loan qualifies for public service loan forgiveness. It doesn't matter when you took it out. But pay as you earn, you can't use pay as you earn if you had loans before 2007. So the borrower who asked that question last night, doesn't matter when you took out your direct loans, a direct loan will qualify. But if you had debt before October 2007, you cannot use pay as you earn. Okay, Lindsay, keep going.
Great.
We'll finish up.
So we have two questions about sort of work eligibility. So I'm just going to feed them both to you at the same time. So number one is working for private foundations considered public service? And the second one is, do you apply for PSLF when you get a job in the nonprofit sector, or do you apply for it when you're picking your repayment plan and then work on finding the nonprofit job?
Okay, let me answer the last one first. You do not, and this is a great question, you do not apply for public service loan forgiveness until you've made all 120 payments. If you talk to any of your friends who recently graduated and they said they applied for public service loan forgiveness, they didn't. What they did was what somebody asked earlier. They filled out the employment certification form and they enrolled in the public service loan forgiveness program to track their payments every year. Guys, you don't sign a contract. You enroll in the program. You track your payments. You track them every year. And once you've made that 120th payment and you have the annual statement that says you did, that's when you apply for public service loan forgiveness. The first question, if you'll go to the studentaid.gov/public service site, you'll see a detailed listing or description of the kind of employers that qualify for public service loan forgiveness. You mentioned private foundation. What has to happen is whoever is paying you has to be a nonprofit, 501c3.gov.org, etc. So if you are being paid by 100% by a nonprofit, it would qualify. Anything else, Lindsay? Great questions.
Yep, we got one last question.
Okay.
So if your loans are in deferment or forbearance while doing public service or in school, are they still eligible for PSLF during those months, even with a $0 payment?
Yeah, the thing is, remember, and I keep going back to this, but these are great questions. For you to qualify, you have to be making a scheduled payment, If you're enrolled in school, your loans are in an in-school deferment. You're not making payments. Those payments are not scheduled. So back to the borrower who asked the question about loans from college, you may have made 18 months worth of payments, but as soon as you enrolled in Penn, those payments are no longer required. You are now in an in-school deferment period. So if you're in deferment or forbearance, the clock is not moving. Great question. Okay, mindful of time. Lindsay, is that okay to show them the next group of workshops we got coming up?
Yep, sounds good to me.
There you go. And Lindsay, they will get a notice about these. Is that right?
Yep, we'll share these dates when we follow up with the slides after this presentation as well.
Yeah, so we'd love to have you guys on these. We've got much more to go, and so please kind of mark the calendar to watch for the notices coming from Lindsay. If you've got great questions, I mean, terrific questions so far. If you've got additional questions after this, if you've got specific questions about repayment, contact Joe Manning and the folks in the financial aid office, the grad professional team. There's the contact information. And please let them know that, hey, I went to the webinar or I participated in the Zoom meeting. I still got some additional questions. They'll try to help you. If you've got general questions about money management, Financial Wellness at Penn will be glad to help you. And this is the first time we've done this, in the first of 5 sessions, as you know. We tried to put together, or Lindsay did, a very, very short evaluation form. Guys, please let us know what you thought about this. I know my skin is thick, what little that I have, so let us know if this helped, if it didn't, how we can improve it. My apologies for the audio. I don't know what happened, but apparently we got it fixed. But there's the link to the evaluation form. And Lindsay, I'll let you wrap this up.
Great. Thanks again, everyone, for joining us today. And we hope we were able to answer some of your pressing questions about student loan repayment options. Again, we'd greatly appreciate if you'd complete the evaluation, and we'll follow up with everyone who attended after this meeting with the evaluation link as well as the slides. So please don't hesitate to reach out if you have additional questions. Thank you.
Thanks, folks. Be safe.